Hey guys, what's up? It's Alexander Williamson here with the secret history inside of your aquarium, my aquarium. Today we're going to be talking about my aquarium. Now this isn't so much history as it is maintenance and upkeep. We're going to be talking about green hair algae or slimy green algae. It's got a lot of different names. And even within the scientific community, when you can narrow down what type of algae it is, there are a lot of green hair algae that it could be. There's a long green hair algae, there's a short, there's a cyanobacteria combo, so we're not going to get into any of that. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. You'll probably go, yep, that's the one I'm looking for in this how-to video. And I'm going to show you some options on how to treat that. There is the first option, which is a light option. There is the chemical option, which I don't usually suggest. And then there is a holistic option, which is what I will be doing, and I'll show you some of that. And then there is the nuclear option for those who really need it gone and don't want to mess around in the tank that much. So let's get into it. Let's look at some of these things. I want you to take a look at, so a normal functioning aquascape aquarium ecosystem. You can see there's shrimp. They're nibbling away at, what is it? If you look closely, it's algae. So they're eating algae. This tank has like no algae hardly. Doesn't get diatom algae. I have to specifically bring in a lot of pleco food for the plecos in here because there's just not much algae. So what I've been doing is I've been taking that top layer of plant that is floating in the other tank and is covered in algae. Let's find a good example of it underwater here. And I'll take small clumps. Here's a good one. This one's a mess. So this is just a ball of 7 or 8 kinds of plants and algae. And it's also got some invasive or pest items on it. And so basically I just wanted to show you, what that's like. Also, I have been collecting, for what we're going to do later, I'm collecting these albino ram's horn snails. And I'll show you what we're going to do with those in a moment. And obviously we don't want to be bringing more of these pests in. We've got duckweed, which I don't want in this tank, ideally in the end. And this is the tank we're going to be talking about today. I'm sorry that the water's splashing a little bit, but I like to keep it running. I like to keep it oxygenated while the fish are in it. So what am I going to do? What do I suggest you do? I'm going to tell you that first. That's the holistic method. And these are just some tips, basically, that anybody could use. And it depends on how infested your tank is. Now, this tank was heavily taken over by algae not long ago. I want you to understand that if you have a tank that is a month to 3 months old, there is a phase, which is when there is all of a sudden no more ammonia, and the nitrates and nitrites have kind of spiked. Your bacteria is eating them and transferring them into nitrates, and they are in a race with any plants you may have. If you don't have plants, it can really explode. But usually where I live, with my water being soft and everything, this is what I end up with. And it is a filamentous, I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that word, algae that is slimy and sticky. And it just, if you try to do something to a little bit of it like this, you'll just notice that it floats off into the water. Can we get a focus on that? So even just taking that off, I broke off pieces, and even though I got the piece I was looking for, I managed to release more of it into the water. So this is a good thing to do when you're doing water changes, because then you can hopefully get some of it taken care of. Also, another little note is that if you choose your fish correctly, you can also make a big dent in this algae. But at a certain point, when you hit this level of algae, you're gonna want to definitely just get in there, and there's no easy way to do it, and manually remove it. You can see that I've got a cleanup crew of, some people may call them flying foxes, but I've got Siamese algae eaters. Surprisingly, my best crew right now are these swordtails, and they just, as long as I disturb the algae, as long as it's not in a mat like this thick, they love munching on it. And if I don't feed them all the time like they want, this is their go-to salad, especially with the pregnant ones like this gal. This is her salad bar over here. Same with the males, but a little less so. Also, the bigger the Siamese algae eater, the better. Be sure not to get Chinese algae eaters. It's a different fish, and it's a much more aggressive fish. These fish are relatively peaceful, but they can turn into a little bit of aggressive fish, especially against one another. So the next fish that I would have on board is some sort of sucker fish, and you can see here I've got some long-fin green dragons, but what they're kind of eating is more of slimy. I mean, they don't do a great job on diatom algae, but they do eat whatever is along the glass, and that's kind of what they're doing. They just stick to the glass and kind of do that, and the rocks. If you have an Iwagumi style scape that's mostly rocks and you get like a thick layer of it, they will clear that out. Now, this tank also has some baby green dragons, which I really like the color on, by the way. And then it has some of these panda garas. And these guys are hit and miss. They can be amazing algae cleaners. See, I'm getting some different spot algae, maybe some black beard starting over there, and that's where he shines. That's where he works. And so you really got to ask yourself, what kind of algae do I have and what do I need to do? Today we're talking about the green algae. The Siamese algae eaters, you can see they're working on it, but nothing is a match for it. So let's discuss real quick what causes algae to grow. So algae grows as, and I'm just going to start pulling manually like I said I was going to have to. So algae grows when there is an abundance of nitrates, nitrogen, nitrite, and nitrates, and light and phosphates. That's pretty much it. Now, what do your fish end up producing once your tank is cycled? They produce a lot of just that. And so, if you can keep at bay the algae just by kind of pruning it every once in a while and taking out chunks, that's fine. But what I get is, you can see here along the back, I will get enough algae coming out of here that I wait, and after a while, I can actually pick up these big old globs. So I will wait for that to happen on the stem plants. And then also, it's not a huge loss if I have to toss out some of these stem plants or some of this stuff like pearlweed. But as a side note, I would say don't introduce a ton of moss into your environment unless it's been cycled for several months, because algae, specifically this slimy green hair algae, does a really good job of colonizing anything with fine little areas. And see, what I'm doing is I'm just taking my hand very lightly. I'm not worrying about it right now. I'm pulling up some of my scapes or my plants, and I'm just seeing what I can get off of the plants and, you know, get it mostly clear. And there's enough here that this will grow back. I mean, you can see there are tiny amounts that will grow back here. That's actually enough that maybe I prune it here, and that'll be okay. But the idea is that you knock it down to a level where the fish and the snails and your sucker fish or your autosinkless, that they can all handle it. So that is the goal of today. So that's the holistic option, is you're working at it physically, you're removing, hold on, let's zoom out a little bit. We're super zoomed in. So you're working at this whole thing with your fingers, and it's annoying and it takes a long time, and if you have multiple tanks, it's going to be a pain in the butt. The other thing I have in here, and is actually, a lot of people think of it as a curse, I think of it as a mixed blessing, is I have Bladderwort. And let's see if I can find a spot where I've got Bladderwort with this algae. And let's see here. Here we go. And when I pull up the Bladderwort, it comes in a line, as Bladderwort does in this long sequence. And with grasses, by the way, I just kind of run my fingers through and kind of give it a soft little manipulation. But here we go. You'll see that having this Bladderwort, which I'll pull up closer and you'll see what I'm talking about. We talked about it in another video. It actually holds together that hair algae really well. And that Bladderwort is, you've probably seen it before, but it's like a string of sinewy plant matter, and then it's got these little bumps on it, which are actually carnivorous plants, which is kind of crazy. But if you have that in your tank with your algae, it actually allows you to kind of have a little handle and allows you to pull it out. I always put all my algae into and I'll do this rolly thing where I kind of just, let's focus, where I kind of just roll between my fingers gently. And if you lose a couple leaves, that's okay. This works well for stem plants. Not so well for crypts and things like that. So with the crypts, I'm very careful not to yank them out at the roots. But like this is a coveted cryptocorn, tiger spiralis. And so I will work a lot longer and more carefully. And you'll know your tank, which ones you need to do. So now, once we get this work done, which can take hours, it can take, multiple days doing sessions of it, you're also going to want to be changing the water. Why it gets the nitrates out and the phosphates, you can see up here, just dropping the water from a water change, I'm able then to use a sponge or my hand or whatever and scrape off big old amounts of it. And that's why I let it grow for like a week or two and get a little out of hand. Because no matter what, if you see it, it's too late. It's in your system. The spores of it are all over. The little filaments are going to be all over your tank. And a lot of times I'll take chunks like this one here, and they look so far gone. They're so matted and messed up. But I'll work them like this, usually deeper under the water, and get what I can out of it. And a lot of times you'll see, oh, good, I didn't toss out a bucephalandra start. But that's when I'll work on kind of breaking up the ball of it and then looking at, well, is it worth saving? What is the plant? So on and so forth. You can get in there with tweezers if you really want to go to town, but I don't do that. But with mosses and things like that, if they still look healthy, I will save them. Ideally, the mosses should be a later addition than this point, than 2 months into this tank or so. So after that, you're gonna change the water, as I said. And you're going to turn down the light. That's one option. The other option that sounds insane is turn up the light and add more plants. either way, what you're doing is you're giving the algae less time to be able to grow and blossom and do what algae do. And that is, you can shorten its photosynthetic period, or you can get plants that are such quick growers, so something like wisteria or vallisneria, that if you got a bunch of starts of it, or pogostemon octopus plant, water sprite, things like that. They don't need to be a permanent fixture in your tank, but they will suck that energy out. They will grow tall, and then you just cut them and trim them and replant them as they're growing, and pull the algae off as you go. And that is another way to do it. But turning down the light is the other way. I actually turn up the light. I turn up the light, I cut all my plants in half, so all these right now, my aquascape is on hold from what it looks like. Basically, we're going to chop all these plants in half and replant them for now, just everywhere. And then we'll get back to aquascaping once this tank finds an equilibrium, which it will. Another interesting point is Pogostemon erectus. I have never had a major problem with Pogostemon erectus accumulating massive amounts of algae. Like, it'll collect some at the top, but for as dense as it is, I don't know if it has some sort of repellent or something on it, but, you know, from all those plants, that's all I got. So, it's a good one. There's certain plants you'll learn as you go that attract a lot less algae. So, we're changing the lights, the light cycle. We're shifting it down. We're taking it down a notch. We're turning it to Kenny G setting. And you can either dim the light, or you can just straight up reduce the light and turn it off. But now, what is the nuclear mode that I talked about? Well, the nuclear mode, I said nuclear wrong. The nuclear mode is where you literally put sheets that are black over your tank, and you try to pull out some big clumps of it if you can, and then you just wait 3 days to a week, and you starve out the photosynthetic life form that is algae. Now, is that a good idea for every tank? Most certainly not for every tank. It may be what you want to do. It may be the most, maybe it's a tank that's at work or in an office, and you just can't work on pulling on it and fiddling with it as much as you would at home. And maybe that is, if you're taking care of tanks for a profession, maybe that is the way that you want to handle the situation. But remember that your other plants and life forms, your fish are going to get all confused, which isn't the biggest deal in the world. But your fish get confused, your plants, the cycles get off. You're probably not going to be breeding any fish of any sort during that period. And see here, I'm just kind of checking, like, okay, where's their algae, where's their bladderwort, and if you can get it off the broadest leaves of things like, we've got it here on the stargrass, and the stargrass is doing pretty well, but the key is to get your fingers in there good at the base, and try not to pull the plant out. I use another finger to hold down the plants, and then pull out with 2 fingers, pinching like little lobster pinchers. So this the amount that I just did here in the front, should allow now, brown cow, should allow the fish to clean up. As we do that, we're going to continue to do a lot of water changes. I'm talking 20% every day for 2 or 3 days after I do this. And then, maybe a 50% at the end of the week or something like that the week after, and or 30%. It just depends on how fragile the fish and plants in your ecosystem are. We can talk about that more on a case-by-case basis personally if you have a question. But this is actually one of the easier, believe it or not, algae to take care of. Even though it's time consuming, you can get it under control. My tank upstairs, the show tank that you've seen in other videos, was absolutely covered to the point where I felt bad, like the fish didn't have places to swim because the algae had reached across and was just so rampant, and like this kind of thing. And you can take care of that, no problem. What I'll do is I'll let things sit like this a little bit. A lot of times I'll throw these into other tanks. But as soon as I've done this, I'm going to crank up the CO2 and the light. I'm going to keep the light high and bright, but only on for like 6 to 8 hours instead of 10 or 12 or whatever you may be doing. I know a lot of people will say, hey, you should only have your lights on for 6 to 8 hours. But let's be real, people. A lot of people want to see their fish more than that. Another good way to do it is to put your timer on so that it's off in part of the day and then comes on at night again so you can enjoy your fish later. Another reason this tank exploded really hard with this form of algae, as they would say in some places, is because I put a giant piece of manzanita in here, and it's full of tannins and organic matter. And algae is not a bad thing. I mean, it shows that your tank has the nutrients it needs to be producing life and good things for the plants. It's just you don't want this crud covering your plants and out competing it. So if you can get your plants to a point where they're strong enough that they're ahead of the game on the algae, and they're, especially broadleaf plants like this, if you can get that algae off their leaves, same with like this Cophifolia anubius, if you can get it off their leaves, you can get some damage control taken care of. Plants like this be a little bit slower. They're actually, you need to be careful during these times. I always take out leaves like this that are damaged because it's a time when other algae and things like that can havoc. So, all right, guys, I just wanted to kind of share with you some of the options you have for taking the algae control into your own hands. Now, let it be noted that you can also do the chemical route. That's the last one I'm going to mention. I don't like it. I've found in my experience that when I start adding chemicals to a tank, then I need to add another chemical and another chemical and a chemical to cancel out the side effects of that chemical. So you can put carbon in your filters and things like that, which will take care of some of that. You notice how cleaning the filter, I got a much better flow. But there's also some algae, and two different kinds. There's one that's living off more rust-based oxygenated iron bacteria there. And some of those are the good nitrogen fixing, producing bacteria. So you don't want to just scrub everything that looks like that. Like it'll be okay. And check your filters. A lot of times you'll have in the filter itself, like in the screen, the guard, you'll find that there's more algae in there. Toss your filter floss if you need to, but if it's a newer tank, like I said, don't uncycle it. But you can use things like Flourish XL or carbon additives that will, I say supposedly, reduce the algae. But a lot of things like stargrass or valsinaria, things like that, will melt and die certain crypts. And I just don't want to mess with that because I've found that, time-wise, and like it still says remove as much as you can by hand. And I've just found that, letting nature take its course, once you've kind of put the pieces in play to re-equalize the ecosystem, it does just fine. So right here, I wanted these albino ram's horn snails in here, and so, you know, in theory, I should be placing them where I want them. But I think 1 for every 2 gallons is a good place to start. If that doesn't work, 1 per gallon is great. Ask your friends or shop if you don't have snails, but 1 snail will turn into a bunch of snails quickly, and hopefully if you limit their algae and food supply, you will limit your snails also, so that hopefully that doesn't become the next pest problem. But with me, I know my tanks pretty well. I know when I'm cycling up what size water. Plus, I have some puffers upstairs, so if things ever get too far out of hand, I simply get rid of the snails by sending them on a one-way, all expenses paid vacation to the puffer tank. So I hope you guys learned something. I know this was a little long-winded, but you won't believe it in a couple weeks when I show you this tank again. It'll be light, vibrant, and full of energy and life. So I'll talk to y'all later, and remember to take care of yourselves, take care of your fishies, take care of the people around you, and have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Take it easy, guys. Bye.